Good afternoon, everybody. It is just now 2 o'clock. I know people are going to be trickling in, so we are actually going to hang out about another 5 to 7 minutes before we get started. So, just giving you a heads up that we'll have a bit of a soft rolling start here. I know how meetings go, so if you need to step away and grab a drink of water or anything, you certainly have a few minutes to do that. I'll pop in every once in a while to remind the newcomers of what we're doing here, but thank you for setting aside the time to join us today. I really appreciate it, and we'll get started in about 5 to 7 minutes. Thanks. Hi again to the new folks who have just joined us. I was saying a minute or two ago, we're going to give people a few extra minutes to get going today. I know there were some other meetings that were going on simultaneously, so we've got another 5 minutes or so before we really get started. Feel free to grab a drink or do whatever you need to do, and I will pop back in a few to get us rolling. Thanks. And one more time, I'll make my rolling announcement for the newcomers. Thanks for joining us. We are going to hang out about another 2.5 minutes before we officially start. So you have a bit more time here. We're just making sure everybody can join us today, and then I will kick us off with reviewing the agenda and we'll get rolling. So got about 2 more minutes. Thank you. All right, well, let's get started. Thank you so much for all of you taking the time this afternoon to join us with this webinar. I am sharing a screen. Hopefully you should be able to see it, this PowerPoint slide kicking us off today. I believe you have the ability to type in the chat, and you also have the ability to share Teams reactions, so thumbs up, that sort of thing. If someone wouldn't mind sharing one of those thumbs up to let me know you can see the screen I'm presenting, that would be fantastic. Great. All right. Thank you. I see that. So this is a new technology that we are using. I mean, we've all used Teams before, clearly, but this is a Teams webinar. So it has the ability to be more directional. So you've noticed that you do not have camera or microphone capabilities as of yet. You will. We will turn on the microphone at various points when we do Q&A. You can always use the chat feature though, or those reactions. So I am recording this meeting. You should be able to see that. Oops, let me go back here. Sorry about that. I'm testing out this new capability here. Alrighty. So so thank you for that. This is why we test new things, right? So as I said, we are recording it, and our intention is to post the recording on our website along with the documents and materials that go with it. So cross your fingers that that works. I wanted to underpromise and overdeliver as opposed to the opposite. I know some of you had other commitments today, and so if you've ducked out of meetings, I really do appreciate it. If you have colleagues here on your behalf, thank you so much for stepping in and listening. If we haven't met, I'm sure I know just about all of you, but if there are any city or county representatives here who I haven't yet met, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Plowman. I am the CDBG-CV project manager at IEDA, the Iowa Economic Development Authority, and I'm here today to share with you kind of what's going on with the program, some high-level updates. We're also going to review the progress policy that we emailed out last month. We'll take questions about that. We will go over the duplication of benefits process, some of the forms that are involved with that process, as well as the claims. I've gotten a lot of questions about how to fill out the claim form in Iowa grants as it pertains to duplication of benefits. So we'll walk through that. I'll do a screen share. And then we are also going to talk through some documentation and record keeping for the low mod jobs, or LMJ, national objective, which pertains specifically to projects that are microenterprise assistance or for-profit daycare assistance. Those are the types of projects that use this national objective. So if that is your project, please hang on through the end and pay attention to that section. If you do not work on that type of project, you're welcome to hop off early, or if it's fascinating to you, stay and learn. You're very welcome to stay. So this is our agenda for the day, and we will keep rolling right along. So to start off with the progress policy, I actually want to take a step back and just catch you up to some program updates. I get questions all the time about allocations and awards. We have officially closed the application. We have received more applications than we have funding for, as is a wonderful problem to have in one sense, because we know that there's a lot of need out there and we're making good headway in distributing the funds. Of course, we want to be able to fund everything to some capacity or another. So on the one hand, you wish you could get it all out there. So we have accepted the final applications that came in time. We have done the initial review. We've negotiated back to get some clarification. And for those of you who are on the call wondering what's the results, we will be making our final reviews in the coming days. And then for those that we are able to fund, we will funnel those up the chain internally to get the final okay, and then circle back around with you. So the funds will be fully allocated, the applications are closed, and that really moves our sight line down to expenditures and deadlines and really getting these projects off the ground and then eventually wrapped up. So HUD is monitoring the expenditures nationwide with CDBG-CV. They are sending out letters to the states where they are noting, hey, here's what your award was, here's how much time has passed, here's how much you've spent. So they are on it, and we need to be on it too. And the reason being is because July 20th, 2023, so just about a year from now, anything that has not been spent, HUD can reclaim. And they just might. So I want to really stress that these projects absolutely have to get done, because we do not want to be in a position where HUD will come in and swoop up anything that has not been spent. And spent does not mean that your contractor has spent it. Spent means that you have submitted the claim to us, we have reimbursed you, and we have submitted the claim to HUD. So we have to keep on top of those things. The cities and counties will be responsible to cover the balance of anything that HUD takes. So if your project is not going to get done in time and HUD comes in and claims the balance, we do not have a backup plan. There is no other funding that is available. Other CDBG funds are for other annual programs, and there is not a backup plan. So the backup plan is for the city and the county to fill in the gap. So I stress this very seriously because we need to stay on top of these things. The absolute worst case scenario would be a project getting stuck partway through and not being able to finish. The other bolded line there is that projects that don't meet a national objective have to be repaid to HUD in full, even if you have already spent the funds. This is incredibly critical for housing projects because they do not meet a national objective until the housing unit is completely constructed and it's being leased out. So that's incredibly important to manage that timeline well. But for any other project as well, if you're hiring someone, creating a new position and hiring an LMI individual, and that is not met, if you haven't sufficiently addressed slum and blight, if you are working with beneficiaries and you understand them to be LMI and it turns out they're not, and you survey later and you didn't meet that objective, these are real issues. So I stress this. I don't know how else I can stress it. These projects need to get done on time or the money will go away and there is no backup plan. It is up to the city and county to cover the balance. So all that to say, this is why the progress policy exists, is so that we all collectively can work together to make sure that these projects get done. And to that end, I want to help resource you as best as I can. So you see two final points on the screen under program guidance. One is recipient workshop detail coming soon. So usually for the annual programs, if you've worked with CDBG before, you have a recipient workshop post-award in which you talk through all the different program requirements, all the different steps that you have to take. The annual program did not do one of those in the fall. Instead, there was the Certified Grant Administrator training this spring that went over some of the information. But CV never had a recipient workshop in the same vein because we've had rolling application deadlines, and this is the first time that we're actually, done taking applications. So all that to say, I realize that I will need to get out to you all some information that's pertinent to your particular types of projects. And if you've worked on CDBG before, go with what you know, because many of these programs are mirrored after and are adhere to the same rules as the annual program. But the ones that are a little bit different, like the public service activities, the micro enterprise activities, they don't really normally fit within the annual program. We will do our best to get you any other information that you don't yet have. So that's coming soon via an email from me. The other thing that's coming soon is our annual management guide update. Every spring or summer, we do post an update to our website. And if you don't have that website information, I think I send it out in about every other email. But you can go to our website and download the most current version of the management guide when it gets updated. And you should pay attention to that. We're trying to get you the most current procurement policy. We're trying to make sure the most current Section 3 information is in there and all these different things. So it really is important to, whenever you're looking for a form, go to the website rather than, a form you may have downloaded and archived for a previous project because it may not be the most updated version. So those are the tools that will be helpful to you as you go forward with managing these projects. So the policy. I emailed out a copy of this about a month ago to get your minds, wrapped around it a little bit. I have not reproduced it on these slides. What I will do is post another copy of it to the website if and when we're able to post this recording to the website as well. But just to kind of root us in some intent and design with this policy. So as you know, as I've stressed, the context is an incredibly short timetable, at like half the amount of time as an annual project or even less than that, and dire funding repercussions. As I had just been saying, when HUD takes the money back, it will be the responsibility of the city to fill in the gap. So in light of that, what are we trying to do here? We are trying to have ongoing risk monitoring. We want to be able to track progress proactively rather than troubleshoot issues reactively. And I realize this goes above and beyond the annual program, and that is because they have a much longer timetable and there's not nearly as much money on the table. So this is different. And the workload falls primarily on me because I'm the one watching all of this and reaching out to you. But it's a team effort. And the idea is, how do we catch problems before they arise, rather than realizing belatedly that things are in trouble and we have now lost the opportunity to address them. So this policy goes into effect July 1, which is right around the corner, knowing that that's about a year out from when HUD will swoop up and reclaim the funds unspent. The policy has several expectations that go along with it, and I want to stress that most of these expectations should not be new to you or should be things that are best practice anyway. There are one or two that are specific to CV, and we can continue to talk through them. And I will, for those of you who may have joined late, the chat feature should be working if you'd like to drop questions in the chat as you come up with them. I will at one point allow the microphones to be unmuted and we can have a conversation a little bit about this too. So if you have questions, that's how we can share them. But these are the expectations. So the first is that the city or county signs and returns the contract by the date listed in the award letter. I have never seen that be a problem. So that one should be like a really easy check the box. But we have that expectation in there so that the contract or the project doesn't languish before it even begins. The second expectation is that the environmental and historic review is submitted in Iowa grants within 90 days of the contract start date. This I realize might be tough, but the intention here is, again, to not let things languish. So once you've got that contract, you should be all systems go to your environmental and historic review. And this does not mean that it needs to be approved. It just means that you have submitted a form, one of these two forms. I realize that some projects start with a sort of simple or generic environmental, and some projects start with a 106. Whichever direction it is, get that form in there, not editing status, but submitted within 90 days of the contract start date. If you hit that milestone, it shows that you're making progress and all is well. The third expectation is that you go out to bid for construction or that you initiate or conduct other procurement within 30 days of receiving your release of funds. Again, trying to show that we're keeping the momentum going here. Release of funds doesn't mean you sit back and relax. Release of funds means you move on to the next thing, which is procurement. And this is because we do not have time to wait in between steps. There will be supply chain issues. There will be construction issues if that's what you're doing. There will be something that comes up. And so you want to keep it rolling. So 30 days should be enough to get your bid specs together. If it isn't, we can talk about that, but 1 month should be enough to initiate getting quotes or whatever it is that your next step is for your procurement. The next expectation is that you submit a claim or a draw request at least every 6 months from the contract start date. That is written into every contract, regardless of if it's CV or the annual program, so that should be something that you're already doing anyway. The fifth bullet point, you will note that I have actually changed this from when I emailed this to you last month. And we can talk about it more in a minute, but the expectation is that you have expended 50% of your award by the 3/4 mark of the life of your contract. Originally, I had emailed out 50 and 50, and I know that's next to impossible. So it's 50 and 75. Now, this is not a perfect science. I realize, you'll be the first to tell me, and I'll be the first to say, I understand that there's so much work you do on the front end. that this might not be possible, but we need to try so that we continue to keep the project rolling, especially for the ones that have such a short turnaround time. So this might be the trickiest one to hit, and we can talk about it as it gets forward, but it needs to be a goal that you're working towards, and it needs to be something you have a plan to at least attempt to hit. The final one is, of course, that you expend 100% of the funds by either the contract end date or July 2023, whichever comes first. As we have written them, all of the contracts end in May. We wanted to provide this buffer from the sort of HUD takes all date. So you need to have expended your funds by the time your contract has expired in order to hit this expectation. If you are unable to hit these expectations, any one of them, you would receive what we're colloquially calling a strike. What that means is that there needs to be a virtual meeting involving me, someone from the city or the county, and the grant administrator, and we're just going to talk about it. What happened? How did this not, get here? Where are things at? And at that point, it will be the responsibility of the city or county, along with their grant administrator, to come up with a remediation plan that then will get sent to me, and we will review over here and we'll approve. And again, it's a troubleshooting. It's a proactive. It's not intended to derail the project more and penalize it. The intention is, how do we get it back on track? If the plan is followed successfully and the issue goes away, the strike goes away. If that's not the case, the strike compounds and there's a second one. And then if there are 3 unresolved strikes, then IEDA may elect to suspend reimbursement for any current and future claims until they are resolved and or explore or initiate deobligation. And that is hard. That's a hard call, and I do not want to have to make that call or be contributing to making that call, because, we'll have to go up the chain. But the reason that's in there is because it would be far, far worse to get far down the line and get stuck, and again, have a city be responsible to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars on their own, which they don't have the funding for, because the project just is so deep into the weeds and derailing that it's not going to get done. So this is a worst case scenario, and we hope that by having this progress policy, we will avoid that. But we also know that sometimes hard calls need to be made. So that is where this is coming from, team effort. Further detail, this was again I'm not going to read through this word for word, but this was on the document that I emailed you a month ago. I think I've talked through most of this already. Release of funds, I will note that it doesn't necessarily just mean the release of funds letter, because if you have a tier 2 project, I realize you get a release of funds letter and then you have to finish your tier 2 review. So release of funds means like both of those things as applicable. The other thing to note is that most of this we will be tracking through reports that we can run through Iowa grants, but the bidding and procurement expectation, there isn't really a good report that can be run, because there's not necessarily a spot in Iowa grants where you usually share that information. So what you'll need to do, grant administrators, when you are working on your procurement, to indicate to us that you are doing that within 30 days of receiving your release of funds, you will need to upload something to electronic documents. It can be a copy of your bid specs and the publication notice to show, hey, we went out to bid. It could be a copy of the quote that you got in from someone for a smaller dollar purchase, something like that. Just something to indicate that, yes, we are working on this. Expended, this is important, refers to approved claims, not merely submitted ones. So when you're talking about expending 50% or expending 100% of your award, the claims need to be approved status, because submitted means there might be mistakes. We're going back and forth. We're negotiating and correcting. So approved is key there. And then the final thing I will say up front is that on July 1, when I start looking at all of these, if you have multiple misses, I'm going to group them together into one initial strike. I'm not going to torpedo any project from the word go. Okay, so it will be sort of a group strike at the beginning. If there are multiple issues to fix, there'll be a group remediation plan for that. And then we'll move along. And after the initial kickoff, then anything that is a strike will be so independently. So that is a lot of information. Q&A, I have already received questions about the whole 50% expended by 50% of the contract, so I changed that to 50% by 75%. Again, it's not a perfect science, but that's the goal that you should be shooting for. I also had someone propose, instead of that expectation, that perhaps grant administrators should send a monthly update listing accomplishments that they've done or things that they anticipate doing in the coming month or two, or any challenges that they have, overcome or are working through. And that submitting that to me on a monthly basis might be a better metric than expending a certain amount of funds. You're welcome to send me reports like that. That's not the direction we're going to go. I'll never say no to that, but that is not required of you. We are going to aim for a percentage of funds spent because that is our driving force here. That is what HUD will go after, so that is what we are going after. So I'm going to look here in the chat to see if I had other questions come in. I don't see anything that's been typed in the chat. So now I'm going to see if I can turn on your ability to allow your microphones. All right, so you should be able, save that. You should be able to unmute now. I don't have a phenomenal democratic way of doing this. If you want to use the reactions to like raise your hand, I can try and catch you. Otherwise, you can just unmute. If you have a question about the progress policy, you can go ahead and share that. Hearing none. Okay, there's a suggestion in the chat to put your name in the chat and then you can go in that order. That's great. If you want to drop your name in the chat, if you have a question, I can definitely call on you that way.
Hey, Sarah, do we need to have like the city approve this or anything like this, or is it just kind of a standing agreement, just confirming?
Yeah, that's a good question, Isaiah. No, you won't have to get this formally signed. I hope that you have forwarded on to your city contacts, and I can go ahead and send a follow-up email to all of them as well. But since you work with them so closely, it made sense to give you the heads up to have talked through it with them ahead of time. So no, there's nothing to sign, and it's just, as I said, the annual program does a risk monitoring once or twice a year. This is that, like, on steroids for everyone's benefit. So there's no necessarily thing you need to get someone to sign on to agree to it. It's just a process that we'll be going through. I feel like I see Kim's name blinking. Kim, did you have a question?
I did, but
maybe not. That's all right. All right, well, I'm going to keep rolling then in the interest of time. Feel free to drop more questions in the chat. If you want to email me, you can email me. We can continue to talk about it more. And then there'll be time at the very end of the call too, or there'll be other Q&A times if you want to pop back in about this as well.
okay.
All right, so progress policy, we've covered that. So now duplication of benefits, or DOB for short, and claims. There are several different DOB forms, and I want to apologize if you have never seen any of these forms. That is okay. These forms were created before I came on board here at IEDA. So they've been around, and in some ways I thought people had access to them, but they may not have. And so we will make sure that you have access to these. So if these are new to you, that is okay. Do not stress out. There are several different types of forms. Oh, let me do one thing here. So I have some of them copied onto screens here for you that I'll show you snippets of screenshots of them. But again, my intention is to put this onto our website in a really easily accessible spot so that you all can have access to any of these forms that you may need. So the first one is an organizational certification. This form is a quite simple one-pager, and the intention is that a nonprofit or public organization should be filling it out. And if you are working with a nonprofit food bank or a nonprofit daycare, you have already probably seen this form if you've been submitting claims, because we've been going back and forth about it. If you're working with a community center or a library, or even your grant does not have a sub-recipient or a nonprofit that you're working with, I'll get to for-profits in a minute. But if it's just something that the city is doing on its own accord, or if it's something that like a commercial facade, then what we want is the city to fill this out. So it gets completed up front once. It gets updated only if or as the funding picture changes. And there are 3 checkboxes that you'll check 1, 2, or 3. They are listed in the order of most to least common. So most of you will be checking the top box. If the second or third one is applicable, you'll check that. And this form will get uploaded with every claim. If you are a food bank or a nonprofit daycare, there's a spot for it called DOB signed consent/release form. If you're not one of those 2 types of projects, there's not really a good spot for it, and so it can go in miscellaneous claims documents. This is a quick snapshot of what the form looks like. Essentially what it says is, hey, these funds are associated with the Stafford Act, which means we need to pay attention to duplication of benefits. The organization is going to affirm that the funding sources that they have are accurate, that they are true, and that if the situation changes, they'll let us know, because we are not allowed to pay for the same thing twice, to use layman's terms. So the first checkbox there, it says we received or expect to receive the additional program funding sources and amount as listed on the application. What that means is in the application, you told us this is all the funding that's coming into this project. You also told us you didn't expect there to be any more. And if that's still true, you check that top box, you sign it, and you're good to go. If something has changed because there's another grant you've applied for, or you've received different type of assistance, or maybe some funding you thought you were going to get from another source fell through, then you would check the second box and tell there what the changes are, what extra funding came in or what dropped out. The third box is we received or expect to receive no additional program funds, and that's really only applicable if there was no other local funding, no other assistance. I mean, it's pretty rare. It's like this will never be a thing. So this is the form that any nonprofit organization or public entity will fill out, including the city, and it will get filled out once and only once unless it needs to get changed again because the funding picture has changed. There is another form that's called a Public Services DOB certification, and this form is specific for beneficiaries. If you're working with a food bank or a daycare, we've probably already talked about this. This is a self-certification form that someone who walks into a food pantry or who walks into a nonprofit daycare and is utilizing those services, that they fill out this form to indicate what their level of need is and if they have other resources out there. And they fill it out the very first time they use the service. And if they continue to use the service, they would refill it out every 3 months so that we have a current snapshot of their need and their level of assistance. And the goal here, we want to be able to steward these resources wisely and provide the assistance that is needed at the time. So if you have someone, for example, who is needing food pantry assistance, let's say for sake of the argument that their household food needs would come to $200 a month and they can only afford $100 a month. So they have $100 a month gap somewhere. What they would be filling out in this form is saying, you know, if I got food stamps, if I got any other, a benefit from another nonprofit, or if I got another resource somewhere, they would put on that form what it was that they already have received, and then they would say, I still have need. And what your role is, and what the food bank's role is to be taking this in at intake and having a conversation with these individuals to just make sure that the assistance we are providing is actually what they need. Because if there's a way that we could help 3 more households, 5, 10, 35, however many more households, we would want to do that, but if we wind up giving services to those who already have them or don't need them, then we've duplicated those efforts unnecessarily. So these are particularly low risk. I mean, it's possible, but it's difficult to have more food than you need. It's possible, I'm not quite sure how, I suppose, it's not really possible to have more daycare help than you need. So that's why this is a self-certification. There is a Spanish version if you need it. And what you're going to do, here's what the form looks like. And what you're going to do is the nonprofit will need to collect these and store them. And every time you submit a claim, you need the most current collection of forms uploaded with your claim every single time, because you might have people coming in at different times. There might be forms being updated at different times. So every time there's a claim that gets in there, and the reason we do this with every claim is so that when HUD or someone pulls files to look at and they look at a claim and they say, here's what you spent money on. Did you look at duplication of benefits? We can say, yes, we've looked at duplication of benefits, because the intention is that every single time we are submitting for reimbursement, we have stopped, we have checked in with the organization. Hey, has your funding picture changed? Have you received other funds? Have you applied for other funds? And if the answer to any of those things is it's changed, then you need to put that into the claim, because if it comes out that there is more funding available, I mean, that's a good problem to have, but it matters for CV, because then we have to reduce our award accordingly, because we cannot pay for the same thing twice. It's a rule that we have to follow. So that's why we do this with every claim, because the intention is that you are stopping at every claim to reassess the situation, and that you're not just assuming that everything is good and nothing has changed. There is also a subrogation agreement. Possibly this one is new for most, if not all of you. This is for higher risk projects. So in our case, that's for-profit developers for upper story conversion projects, because that's a lot of money that's going to one particular owner and developer. So that's a significant investment. It also is required for for-profit daycares and micro enterprises, because those, as small businesses, there are a plethora of funding opportunities often for small businesses. And so the risk is that it's possible that other money could flow in or out for working capital, for really honestly anything that we are already providing funds for. So this agreement should be completed once upfront. Again, if you haven't yet seen it, that's okay, complete it now. And then it will get uploaded just once into electronic documents. It does not have to go into the claim itself, although if you would prefer to put it in the claim also, you may, in the miscellaneous claim documents. And then this is another situation where if the financial picture changes, you need to let me know ASAP. So if you have a micro enterprise or a daycare, for-profit daycare, or the developer that says, hey, I had this other grant opportunity come in, or hey, I have this other, influx of funds come in for this that I can use for this project, that should be a red flag. You should be able to reach out to me immediately, and we can talk through whether or not that is or is not a duplication of benefits. And just because you're not putting this in the claim doesn't mean that you shouldn't still be checking. So when you're putting in claims, please have a conversation with your points of contact and say, how is your funding picture? Is it the same as the last time we chatted? If so, great. If not, like the claim should be your point of like, this is where we're checking all these things. This is, I won't let you read all this now, but I'll send this to you. The subrogation agreement, essentially, it's going to be between the city and the individual, right? The business owner or the developer. And essentially what it says is if there's a duplication of benefits, I'm going to repay it. And this, I'm not going to hang on to those funds or whatnot, because I understand what the duplication of benefits rules are saying. So this is a place for both of them to sign. This should not be new information for anyone who has not yet signed this, because this is the type of thing that has been in our DOB policy from the word go, and it's something that the city would have already looked at their hearing when they adopted the policy, and it's hopefully the type of things that you have communicated down the line to these individual beneficiaries or subrecipients. Subrecipient in the loosest frame of, definition of the term. So I'm going to switch now and show you Iowa grants real quick. We're going to walk through that status detail form, which is new for CV, and I'll just kind of play around with it a little bit to show you what it looks like and what the fields mean. So let me, I think I have to stop sharing momentarily in order to start sharing elsewhere. One moment. And then, okay, I'll pull that up in a second. All right, so we're going to stop sharing that. Okay, so here is the Iowa grants form. This is a test. This is none of your projects. Okay, so I'm not messing with any of your projects. This is the test contract here. When you start editing a claim, there are these various components. Status detail is what I'm talking about here. So I've played around with a few, but I'm going to go here and click add as if I were creating a new one, because that's what you'll be doing under the status claim status detail table. You'll click add. Here's where you're going to want to type in the name. This is the type of project that you're doing. So the name could be such and such food pantry, or such and such, City of ABC's microenterprise project. If you want to get specific, because it's a claim for a particular microenterprise, if you have multiple microenterprises, you could say microenterprise ABC. That's fine. It's a little bit fluid, but what you're trying to describe is what these funds are for here. Same with the address. If there's a specific address location, put that. Otherwise, you can put the city address. Assistance type, this is referring to the national objective. So if you're using LMA, area benefit, you would select that one. Individual assistance is sort of like a limited clientele. So this is for things where there are individual beneficiaries, like food pantries or the daycares, nonprofit daycares, that is. Job creation. This is if your project is doing, obviously, LMI job creation. So that would be for microenterprises, some of them, and for-profit daycares. Housing, Slum and Blight, those are pretty obvious. The other individual assistance one would be for a microenterprise where the owner is LMA. So you're going to select one of those, and sometimes they pop up additional questions, right? For the individual assistance, this form was designed for the entitlements who are receiving a little bit of this state funding, and they initiated their funds very early on in the pandemic, and they did a lot of rental assistance. So they needed to know household information at the beneficiary level. That's why this form is here. I do not think it pertains to any of your projects, so you can kind of ignore that. Area benefit, it's going to want to know population served, LMI population served, and LMI percent. Pretty straightforward information that I hope you should have. Job creation does not have anything further, neither does housing, and neither does Slum and Blight. So really, it's only the area benefit, if that's your national objective, that an area benefit could either be if you were using ACS data, or if you did a community-wide survey in order to determine that City of ABC was 55% LMI or whatnot. That's where this comes into play. Then there's this drop-down question here. Is this a nonprofit daycare assistance or food pantry assistance project? If it's not, just say no. And at that point, you've answered all of the questions and you just hit save. If it is, and I think I've talked to most of you, you have more questions that show up here. DOB discovered, yes, no. This is because you're doing your job and you're looking to see if the organization's financial picture has changed, or if perhaps, we've assisted individual beneficiaries more than they had need. Most of the time, I would hope your answer here is that you've not discovered a DOB, but if in case you have, please let us know and say yes. The verification of sources checked date, that is whatever day you sat there and looked at all those files. Maybe it's the same day you're submitting the claim, maybe it was a week or two prior. If it was several months prior, I would maybe scratch my head a little bit, but that's kind of when are you looking to see, hey, everything looks good here. And if you had to do any type of calculation, like, if the organization said, yeah, I just got this extra $10,000 grant, then you would sit there and do the math and figure out, okay, if you had this extra grant come in, was it for the same purpose? Yes, it was. Okay, then that's a problem now. Or if it was for a different purpose and a different need, and then there's really no DOB. So if you had to sit there and assess an actual DOB, that's where that date goes in. Did they receive other COVID assistance? Yes, no, that should be pretty self-explanatory if they did or didn't. Total need, this is your claim amount. This is the amount you're saying we are requesting reimbursement for this much because they have a need for it. You type in the claim amount there. The total amount of assistance already provided, that is any of the DOB that you found. So again, if they're putting in a claim for $20,000, but all of a sudden they had an extra $10,000 show up, and if it does constitute a DOB, then you would put $10,000 in here. And if that's true, then you simply do a subtraction. They asked for 20 in the claim. They found 10 as a DOB. So 10,000 is the only amount that we can actually approve at this time. And then you would put that in there. Here's where you upload files. This DOB signed consent release form, that's the organizational form that I showed you at the very beginning. That goes there every single time. It should almost never change. Subrogation agreement, this is going to be applicable probably to, it's not going to go here. I realize that I said earlier it goes in electronic documents. Again, this file was built more for, or this form was built for when the entitlements were using this for like housing, rental housing. So that's why that's there, but you can ignore it because your subrogation agreements are going in electronic documents. And then this, so you can ignore that date too. The self-certification form is the individual beneficiary form that the food bank or daycare clientele fill out at the beginning and then every 3 months later. So you fill that out, you hit save. Yes, you fill out all the fields. Let's pretend I did that. All right, then once you've done this table, it will populate here all your information. There's a second part here that says external funds. This is always required 100% of the time, regardless of what type of project you have. So every single one of you will do this, every single claim. You hit add. Date received. So if they received other funds, like, hey, that $10,000 grant that popped up, whatever date they got that $10,000, you put the date in there, you put $10,000 in here, you say it came from, it was an SBA loan or USDA or whatever it was. Let's say they've spent none of it, so the full 10,000 is there. Let's say they went ahead and spent half of it already, then you put the balance there, and then you would say the use of funds. And if it was, you know, we got these funds for staffing and CV is paying for staffing, that's obviously a problem. But let's say the funds were put in for inventory and we're just paying for staffing, then that's not a duplication of benefits because they were two different purposes. So either way, we want to have the use of funds clearly described in here so that we can verify, yep, that's a duplication, no, it's not. If they have not received any new funds, that's great. You still need to fill out this form. So you can put today's date in here. You can put 0 for the amount, 0. You can put NA for source of funds, and for the use of funds, right? NA, no funds received. That's the only way I will know that you have looked at this, is if you add something like that. Otherwise, to my eyes, you've just forgotten it or chosen to ignore it. That's why you have to do it every single time. So that's the Iowa grants side of things. I realized that was probably like drinking through a fire hose. You're always welcome to reach out to me if when you're actually doing this, you know, you can't quite figure it out. You're also always welcome to just try your best and start it. And then if it's not exactly what I need or if something's in the wrong spot or missing, I will kick it back to you. And then we'll work on it together. So that will be that. Okay. The last thing I want to say before I hop to questions is that sub-recipient agreements also have DOB language. Here is an example text of what is in our template on our management guide website that is specific to the CV program, and you will not find it in any sub-recipient agreement template you would have had for a previous annual program project. We will be looking for this in any sub-recipient agreement. If your project is not a traditional sub-recipient, but there's another type of agreement like a development agreement or a forgivable loan agreement, we will be looking for some type of duplication of benefits language. You're welcome to lift this text exactly. If you have something similar, you can let me know, I can review it, but we need to have that in there. If it's not there, go ahead and amend it now. If you know it's not there, if I catch it later, I will ask you to amend it if it's not there. So So that's just an FYI that that's another spot where it needs to be. All right, so that that was a lot of information, I realize. I saw in the chat there was a question, where do we find the DOB forms? Chris, at the moment, I may have emailed them to you, but what I intend to do is put them all on our website so that you can download them straight from there. You can also feel free to reach out to me if you need one like ASAP before it gets up there, and I can send it to you. But the intention is that it will be on our management guide website where you can pull it from there. The other question is, Brad says, so that external funds form doesn't include the local city match to the program. That's just new funds not outlined in the application. That is correct. If you had a local match that we knew about from the beginning, you don't have to put that in your claim. The second portion of that claims form where I said literally every single person has to fill this out every single time, that is not where the match goes. That is like new funding that we have not known about yet. It was not covered in your application, and it has not come up on the radar since then. Does that help? It makes sense. I will allow you guys to unmute again. Give me 1 second here. All right, feel free to drop your name in the chat or raise your hand or something. If you have additional questions, you should be able to unmute and ask those about anything DOB related, claims related, etc. I'm boring you to tears. This is fantastic.
Sarah, I just unmuted myself. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think I just wasn't completely following with the requirements for food pantry. So the information that they would need to collect regarding duplication of benefits would be dependent on where their beneficiaries are receiving other services. And then I guess a follow-up to that, if that's the case, and they have to do additional intake with all of their beneficiaries when they use their services, then are they kind of doing that ongoing through the grant period and then just providing aggregated information on a form? Or am I just completely not following what's required there?
No, that's thank you for asking that. So, all right, so I'm going to go back to that screen. You know, it's one of those things where I've thought about it for so long now, it's just like in my head, but how to communicate it well for the rest of you. So this is the form, for example, for a food pantry, and where it's highlighted food and nutrition. If it was a nonprofit daycare, which I honestly don't think we have nonprofit daycares. I think we only have for-profit daycare. So I'll just say food pantry. You would change that if not. But when the first time that someone comes into the food pantry since the start of the CV program, they haven't been there since the start, the goal is that the food pantry worker would sit down with them and say, the groceries today are, you know, paid for in part by this funding that came out of the CARES Act, and they need us to kind of check and see what your level of need is. So we need everyone to agree to this form and certify that what you are asking for is the need that you have. So they would maybe have a conversation and say, you know, do you receive any other kind of assistance funds? SNAP, WIC, do you go to other food pantries? Do you have, you know what I mean? Like, do you have other ways that you receive either in kind or dollars for your food household needs? And if they say, yes, I do, I get, you know, X number of dollars from SNAP, whatever, then they would write that in here. If they have not received any other assistance, they just either go to the grocery store or they come here and that's it. Then they fill in nothing on the top. They just check that box and they can sign and date it. And what they are certifying is they have received no other assistance and they still have remaining need. Like they received either what they've said up on top and they still have remaining need. And if they get more than they need, they'll repay it. And what they're saying is true to the best of their knowledge. Now, this is very low risk. As I said, it's difficult for someone to walk away with more food than they actually need. It's also difficult to verify that. But our intention here is to have someone say to the best of their knowledge, they are receiving what they need and not more. They're not getting a bunch more for friends who aren't here with them. They're not getting a bunch more to like stockpile because that's not a good stewardship resource, that kind of thing. So the very first time they come in, they fill out this form and the food pantry hangs on to it. Then all of these forms, let's say the food pantry has like 50 of them or something because they've helped 50 people. They scan them into one PDF, and that one PDF with all 50 forms you upload to the claim. Then a month later or 2 months later, they submit another claim. And if nothing has changed, if no new people have come, or it hasn't been 3 months yet, it's the exact same form. They just upload it again. However, if someone new has come, or if it's been 3 months since the first person came and they came back and they refilled this out again, because every 3 months we want to make sure, by the way, you're still saying this is the need I have, then they would create for you a new PDF with the most current forms for everybody and upload that. So there's not like an aggregate document somewhere, it's just an aggregate file. And it really should happen as they come in, and it should really only have to happen once every 3 months for any particular individual. And it's okay if they have other sources of assistance, as long as all the combined totals of assistance is not more than they actually need. And the only way we know that to be true is by taking them at their word when they self-certify with this form. The reason there is an arrow there that says note the additional clarifying phrase is because some of you I have emailed this form to already, and it did not have that additional phrase, and the phrase is added that, hey, we still have need, because the whole point here is to say we have need, and I realize this form doesn't express that very clearly. So if you have been using this form without that phrase up until now, that's okay. Just try to grab the new one, the updated phrase in the future when you go forward. Use it from that. So I hope that answers your question, Tom. Is that helpful?
Yes, but I have a follow-up. So if
Alright.
the food pantry is not purchasing food with the grant, then does this not apply?
If what they are doing is just purchasing supplies, the supplies are still there for the intent of providing food to the beneficiaries. So if they are purchasing a vehicle to do, deliveries, if they're purchasing a cooler, a freezer, so that they can offer more food, indirectly, that's still providing food benefit to individuals. And the whole point is that with the freezer, you can get more food out to people. That's like the whole point of this is to increase the capacity, right? Or with the vehicle, you can deliver more things to more people. So yes, we ask that they please still have it filled out, even though the funds aren't going to the bananas, they're going to something that allows people to get bananas, for example. I see Myrtle has her hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Me, Sarah?
Yep.
Oh, good. On some projects, we're seeing that costs are significantly higher. That really just relates to supply chain, inflation, all of those things happening in the marketplace, demand for contractors. And I'm wondering if then the developer was able to find more assistance somewhere, but not more so than their costs have increased. Is that still considered a duplication in terms of potentially reducing the amount of their assistance?
So that's a great question. And I would say that if you have a situation where, yeah, exactly that, your budget was one thing, but the reality is something different. And in order to make the ends meet, like in order for the project to be successful, funding will have to come from somewhere. If there is another source of funding, that is potentially an option and it doesn't necessarily have to be a duplication of benefits. I would request that you let me know about that ahead of time so that we can have a conversation about it. But yes, a duplication of benefits, really the two ways that something can be a DOB. One is if it's the same purpose at the same amount, then you really are buying the same thing twice, and that's a DOB. The other thing is if it's a different sorry, if it's, so yeah, you're looking at the purpose and I said that backwards, but you're looking at the purpose and you're also looking at the total cost, because you can have funding for a housing project and then you need more funding for the same housing project. And as long as it doesn't exceed the amount, then it should be okay. But if the amount that comes in exceeds the gap or exceeds the unmet need, then that's where it probably does become a duplication of benefits. So that's why if you just chat with me first, we can walk through it together. And particularly if you know there's going to be a situation like that where you're going to have a gap. I will say this too, like private funding and loans, those are never duplication of benefits. So if there's a situation where a developer is taking out another loan to make ends meet or something, like that's never going to be a problem. It's usually external funding, like a grant, maybe like small business loans, those types of things, anything that was like, hey, COVID relief. But we can talk through that. If you have questions, definitely loop me into that. But that's a great point. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I know costs are crazy, so yeah. All right, I know we need to talk about low mod jobs, so I'm gonna keep going. If you, like I said before, if this is not your project and you have something else you need to get running to, that's okay. If you need to hop off, if this is your project, please hang on with us for the last bit of this meeting so that we can talk through, because this is not the type of thing that we usually fund. So this is probably going to be new information for most of you, I would think. All right, so while that transition's happening, go back here. Talked through questions. All right, LMJ. Some of you have probably seen this already, particularly if you have had an earlier project award. If you were one of the first ones, I think I've talked with some of you already about this. Again, this pertains to micro enterprise projects who are, the owners are not LMI, so they are creating positions and hiring people who are LMI. It also would pertain to for-profit daycares, of which we have several, because they are creating new jobs and hiring LMI individuals to fill them. So there are 4 methods for qualifying a new hire as LMI. And I have this all in a nice document that I can also post online. I did put some of the text on the screens, but not all of it because it's a lot of words to look at. The first method where you document presumed LMI status, I will return to momentarily. The second status where you document the annual wage salary of the position itself. This is where you're looking at how much are you going to be paying this new person, the new job that's getting created. If the salary of that new job is equal to or less than the Section 8 low income limit for a 1-person family, you're done. That's it. You just need to look up those limits. And I've got a link in this document that you will be able to use. You look up those limits. You look and document somewhere that the job is going to get paid X amount and it's equal to or less. That's it. I don't love this method because I don't want to create a lot of low wage jobs. However, some jobs are what they are. And if that's just the nature of the industry and that's how much the job is, then that's a really easy way to make sure that the person you're hiring is LMI. The third method there says document the individual income of a new hire via Part 5. This refers to an individual who's getting hired as long as they are 18 years or older. If it's a high school student, you want to have to look at the whole household. But assuming that it's an 18-year-old or higher, you can look at just the individual income, even if they're married. So if you have someone whose spouse or partner is a doctor, but this particular individual as separate from that has an income less than that, it's okay. You don't need to look at the whole household. What you'll do is you'll use the HUD Part 5 verification method. This is the exact same method that would be used for the annual upper story program when they lease new apartments to tenants and they have to meet the LMI criteria. They go through this process, so it's the exact same process. There are instructions in Appendix 5 of our management guide. There's a checklist. You either have to use that exact same checklist or you have to have something very, very, very similar to. The whole point is we want to be able to look at the entire income picture and not just income, but also assets. And I stress this because I've seen a lot of applications come in where the asset information is straight up missing or it's not calculated correctly. And it might be rare that someone's, you know, value of a home is enough to put them over the threshold, but you still have to check. So we might in the future create a training about that, just FYI. But you're going to follow that method so that you can say this particular individual's LMI. The fourth method here is looking at the entire household income, which you would do if the new hire is under 18. I don't know in what other case you would want to do that because that's way more work for yourself and it's unnecessary. So usually in all circumstances, we look at household income, but CV has a very specific waiver. When they created CV, they said you can look at the individual for LMJ. And so we said, that's fantastic. We want to make it easier and streamlined for people. So that's why the third method exists. I skipped the first method where it's presumed status. This is more information about that. Essentially, I'm not going to read it word for word, but what you have to do is look at census tract or block group data for either the person being hired where they live, or where the job is located. And there's criteria and there are different thresholds of LMI, and then this description of if it's in general distress, and there's a definition in there what general distress looks like. So this is a way to say that, you know, the individual person, we don't really know what their income is, but we know where they live or where the job is, has a lot of LMI in the area. Thus, we can presume that it is very likely that this person is also LMI, even if they are not. So if you happen to know this information, it's a much easier way to document rather than having to collect someone's income information. Again, this is all on the form that it's not a form per se, it's a information sheet that we'll put online that you can have. What you want to be sure that you do when you're working through this process is to communicate upfront. I hope that the business owner is aware of this. I hope that you've had a conversation with them at the application stage, if not, you know, before, or at the award stage, if not before, where you've said, hey, this is the process you've elected involves these things, and we are going to have this information in order to meet this goal. It's not just like it would be nice to have, it's like we need to have. What that also means is that you probably in some ways need to communicate that to the potential new hire. I suspect it would be jarring for someone to interview for a job and get hired and then be demanded all of their income information. So think strategically about how you might want to communicate that, because it is a prerequisite of this funding. It's what the owner has said they are committed to doing. So it needs to happen. So just be thoughtful about that, because what you don't want to do is hire someone and then realize you have no way to meet this requirement with that person. You've put the business put themselves in that case in a tricky spot. If that did happen, these are your options. You can create yet another position and try again, in which case you've now created 2 new jobs, or you return the funds, because you have to meet this. This is just as critical as addressing slum and blight. It's just as critical as finding the right LMI percentage for a new housing project. It's just as critical for assuming that you've done your ACS data or your survey correctly. This is one of the tenets of the CDBG program, is hitting national objectives. So if you are not able to hire an LMI person, then there are consequences. So the way that we set up our program guidance is that 51% of the new positions created have to go to LMI individuals. So if you, and they're FTEs, full-time equivalency. So if you are hiring and you have to hire 1 FTE, that's the agreement. So if you're hiring 1, then that person has to be LMI. If you've got 2, well, 51% is still both in that case, 3, you know, and so on and so forth. So it's very critical. It's very important. I realize it's new, but it's still something we need to be diligent about. As far as record keeping and documentation, you're going to want some kind of an agreement written down with the business. They are going to want to sign something that says, yes, this is my intention. I'm going to do this. You'll also want to write down the job specs. This is the type of job we are trying to create. It's going to be 2 part-time, it's going to be 1 full-time. You know, what is the FTE ratio? Again, you're looking for 1 FTE at a minimum. And you also want to capture the actions the business are going to take to ensure that at least 51% of those hires will be LMI persons. So this is something that you would hopefully do up front. This can be in the form of the forgivable loan agreement if it's a microenterprise. It can be in the form of a sub-recipient agreement. If I realize for-profits are not technically sub-recipients, but you might have for like the for-profit daycare, that's not a forgivable loan situation. And so you might have a twist on a sub-recipient agreement and you can put this language in there. It could also just be something else that they write and sign if you've already got those things squared away and it's not in there, but you should have it somewhere. And then for each new hire, you will want to make sure you have in a file what the job title was and the FTE was, and then the name and the income status of that new hire per job title. If you didn't use income because you used the presumed LMI, then obviously you want that information in there, the census blocked information, all of that. And then unfilled positions. So this is rare. Let's say you tried really hard and you interviewed a bunch of people, but you could not find anyone to fill this job who was LMI. You can still demonstrate that you tried really hard, in which case you want a file where you have the job title, the job description, the FTE. You also need to then list out if there are any prerequisites or skills that were required for this job, and if so, what the business plan was to provide those things. Because in order for this to be accessible to anyone, particularly an LMI person, you need to be able to have it something where they can learn and train on the job if there are other skills required. And then you need to be able to document how first consideration was given to LMI persons for the job. So you can record the names of the people who were interviewed, the dates of the interviews, and then the income status of the persons that were interviewed. So if you have a robust file of like, hey, we tried, we just couldn't do it. Let me know if that's going to be a thing and we can talk through and make sure we're doing that correctly. But don't hear me say that's an easy out option, because that is not what I'm saying. That is a last case resort, and you need to have robust documentation in order to have that fly. So that is what I have. Again, this is not a form so much as it is information. I will post that on our website as well, on the management guide page somewhere, and you can use that as a reference. I'm going to look and see again in my chat here to see if there were any questions that came in. I don't think there are questions that have come in the chat specifically about the LMJ. That's fine. I'll go back to my options here and turn on the microphones again. All right, so your mics should be available. If you have questions about the LMJ, record keeping, or documentation, go ahead and throw those out. It's a new practice. So, and I don't know going forward if this is something that we'll continue to have for the annual program, if there will be other ways. I think we'll have to just wait and see, but it is an option for CV. So here is a question, and this I think goes back to DOB. How is the subrogation agreement different than the sub-recipient agreement? Good question. So subrogation is specific to DOB, and what it is the individual is saying, I understand that this grant comes with this DOB policy intact. I understand that if DOB becomes a reality, then I will repay to you the extra funds that you have given me unnecessarily. And it is essentially a way for them to say that what the information that I am telling you about this financial picture is accurate, and that there are consequences if I have falsified this information. So it's just a way for the developer or the business owner to be able to agree, because they, at the city level, they've adopted the DOB policy, but at the individual level, it's not like they did necessarily. So it's a way for the business owner to say, I'm taking DOB seriously. I will tell you if things come up, if my financial picture changes, and we will, act accordingly. And if somehow CV gave me money that I got from somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. Sub-recipient is just that agreement that basically says, hey, we're following the CDBG rules, right? So usually subrecipients are for nonprofits. They're for pass-through situations like community centers where the city has applied for funds on behalf of the YMCA or community center, and they sign the subrecipient agreement and they agree to follow all of the CDBG rules and requirements and provisions. So it's sort of more program wide. A for-profit is not technically considered a subrecipient under HUD's language, which is why for the microenterprise, instead of signing a subrecipient agreement, they're signing a forgivable loan agreement. That's why a for-profit developer is signing a development agreement. And that's why a for-profit daycare, which sort of fell in the crack there of we don't usually have a bucket for them to fall into. If they sign a subrecipient agreement, it's accomplishing those same sorts of things, saying, hey, we're going to be responsible for how we're spending these funds. It's just a terminology thing in that case. So a very long-winded answer, but thank you. Any other questions about LMJ or really anything at this point that we've talked about today? Not seeing anything in the chat and not seeing any hands raised, so I'm going to assume that's a no. Okay, well, in that case, I will just say a few final reminders here before we wrap up. This is just a recap of the day. CDBG funds that are not spent in time will be recaptured by HUD. I don't know how many other ways I can say that. And when they are, there is no other funding on our end to help you close that gap. So if your project is delayed, the city is responsible for finishing up the costs. If HUD takes the money, it's gone. We don't control it anymore. If the project does not complete successfully and a national objective is not met, if slum and blight is not satisfactorily addressed, if LMI persons are not taking up residence in new housing units, if new jobs are not filled with LMI people, if a project fails at that level, HUD is allowed to take everything back, the entire award, in which case the city will need to repay funds they have already spent. So to that effect, we have created this progress policy so that we can proactively together keep on top of things and keep the momentum going in the right direction. That goes into effect July 1. What I will be doing the first week of July is trying to assess where everything is at. We've got some reports generated that will kick out some information. I will be also reviewing where things are at as well. You'll be hearing from me if anything is awry that first week, and then we will work together on how to remediate that issue so that things can get back on track. All CV claims require the status detail form to be filled out, even if there's no duplication of benefits, and regardless of project type. There's just different ways you do that. Failure to successfully document the LMJ national objective will require either additional new hires or repayment of funds. Even because it is new does not mean we can sort of halfway do the thing. We have to all the way do the thing. And as a reminder, there will be more recipient workshop quote type guidance to come. So we did not have a traditional recipient workshop. This feels like half of one. But I will be looking through the files that, what did DTR send you up front? What did Upper Story send you? And I will send you similar information. If you are a whiz at those types of projects already, that's fantastic. Go with what you know to be true in those programs, because 99 out of 100 times it's true in this program. But if there's specific other things like this LMJ documentation and stuff like that, I will make sure that you have it. And as always, please, please, please continue to ask me questions. I'm sure you all are already very tired of hearing from me because I'm persistent, but you're always welcome to reach out as well. And you can always try and call me if I'm, not at my desk or in a meeting. Leave me a voicemail, send me an email with whatever your question is, and we'll find a time to connect about it as well. Brad wants to know if I can do a blanket email with those forms and updated policy. Yes, I can try and do that. And then his phrase is to everyone with the CV. So to everyone, I did have someone ask, hey, can you make sure so-and-so's on this email list? I, as a default, go to who is your grantee contact on Iowa Grants. And if there are additional contacts listed, then I use those names as well. I know some grant administrator organizations, some COGs, there's one person who touches the project and some it's like all of you touch it, but I don't know if all of you touch it. So if I omit someone, it's not intentional, I apologize. Feel free to forward amongst your colleagues. Also, if there's a way that you can add someone's name as a grantee contact or additional contact, that will also help me know who to ask or who to send information to. So that's just a request from my end. Any final thoughts, questions, concerns? I really do appreciate you taking the time to be here. I am recording this, assuming that it downloads properly, we will upload it. At the very least, I can put the slides and the forms up there if the recording itself does not make it. For those of you who rearrange schedules to be here, I greatly appreciate that. And for all the hard work you're doing, I greatly appreciate it. I know this is a lot of extra funds and a lot of extra projects, which is really exciting, but it's also a lot of work, and I recognize that. So I thank you. If there's anything I can do to be helpful, please, please, please ask me. I want these to succeed just as much, if not more than you do. So I'll be around. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.